On this episode of the Bronze Metalist podcast, we talk about, well, we're not talking about any albums today, actually. We're going to be doing a rundown on genres, because I realized we haven't necessarily talked about what defines certain genres, so this will be a nice little condensed lesson for you today. Isn't that right, Jaron?
It absolutely is. I've had no idea what genres we were in other than progressive, so...
Yeah, okay, so we're going to clear things up for you. Let's get to the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bronze Medalist Podcast. My name is Kale.
And my name is Jaron.
I don't know why I decided to,
trail off.
It's too bad that you're... Because if you went Jaron... Because I went Kale. Yeah. I don't know. This is a silly, stupid podcast where we talk about metal and other things in our lives that we like. I listen to metal a lot. Jaron doesn't listen to it a whole bunch. Today, we're kind of taking a step back. And instead of talking about a specific album, we're going to be talking about genres and what defines certain genres. Genres themselves are kind of, I don't want to say a hot button issue, but they've always been something that people love to argue about. But I think there is definitely some very easy to define hallmarks to each genre, despite what people say, oh, we just make music, man.
Yeah.
Okay, you can come at it with that ethos, but there are things in common that people can categorize.
Yeah.
So, but before we do that, what's going on? What's happening with you? Do anything cool this week? Did you go to Hawaii again?
Yeah, I went to Hawaii again. It was great. We went to the Big Island this time. No, I'm just kidding. I wish.
We broke into a different Disney set.
Yeah, we broke into the other Disney resort. No, Easter was this past weekend, and it went by so fast. I got home on Friday, and then I blinked, and I was sitting in church on Sunday, and I was like, what the heck? I was planning on doing so much stuff. I was going to get caught up on some Netflix shows I've been watching and stuff. And yeah, so it flew by, but this weekend my girlfriend's going to come visit me, so it's going to be really nice.
Nice stuff. Yeah, I didn't do anything particularly interesting for Easter. I was going to go home on Saturday night, but then it started getting really icy, so I decided I was going to wait until Sunday morning. Got home, I got my new sweatshirt that I'm wearing right now. It's my Counterparts sweatshirt that I ordered a month ago for my birthday, and it finally arrived, so picked it up when I went home. Had a nice Easter meal with the fam, got to see my nephew. It was real nice and pleasant. Nothing terribly interesting there. Our lives have been surprisingly mundane this week.
Yeah, I think, especially for me.
I should mention, I also got a new phone.
Ooh.
So I got the Galaxy S9. It's really, really slick. I like it. I haven't had a ton of chances to use the camera on it so far, but we'll be taking some Instagram pictures for the show tonight. And I don't know why suddenly. Is this the ASMR version?
That's that we have nothing left to say.
Yeah.
Or open your eyes.
Should this be an ASMR podcast?
Yeah.
From now on? God knows. Okay, already stopped.
Never mind. Revert back to metal.
Yeah, because I can hear it in my headphones loud and clear, and it's like, no, thanks. I'm okay. But I got the S9. It's nice. It's slick. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say our life's been so mundane because I went to Hawaii, so I sapped all of the excitement out of it. It's
hard to follow that up, especially with your crazy friggin' stories.
Yeah.
It's really hard to follow that up with anything interesting that happened. I signed up for a class that I should have had years ago and that I should have already been signed up for, but thankfully there's literally one thing that gets done in this class because I had a requirement that I hadn't fulfilled and I needed that requirement to graduate. And instead of being like, okay, I know this class is full, so I can't sign up for it right now. I should go and get an ad slip right away. It's beginning of January. Let's go and do it. Didn't do that. Instead, I waited. Thankfully, the event that we're going to, so it's History 95, which is an intercultural experience class. And so what they're doing this semester is just going to the powwow that's held here in Minot and writing a paper about it. And thankfully that hasn't happened yet. So I went and talked to the professor who teaches that class, and he was really cool about letting me into it. So yeah, I can graduate as planned.
Perfect.
So yeah, that's out of the way, and that was a really big relief. And having my senior project done is another huge relief. So yeah, I'm just riding high. I'm not. I shouldn't say I'm riding high. I'm coasting into graduation and finding a new place. That's another, like, I'm balancing on between being relieved about having a bunch of graduation stuff done and being terrified of, finding a new place and like moving out and moving all my stuff out and, potentially getting a cat and starting a full-time job. Like, I don't know.
It's like exciting that college is over, but oh crap, the storm's about to come now. The
real world is about to smack me in the face real hard. So
yeah.
I'm not sure if I should just relax and, sort of slide into it and wait for the hit to come, or if I should brace for it.
I would say be blissful until the moment that it smacks you.
Okay. Well, and that's what they say in boxing, right? You're not supposed to tense up before the punch.
Yeah.
You're supposed to, go a little limp, and that's how you take a punch. All of the knowledge I've accrued about boxing from my very storied athletic career. You got anything else to talk about?
I don't think so. I want to start guessing what the genre's hallmarks are.
Okay, so the reason why we're doing this episode is because a couple committed fans, being my sister and brother-in-law, specifically my brother-in-law, asked me to do an episode where we sort of explain what some of these genres that we talk about are, because not that I've taken for granted that everybody knows what metalcore is and everybody knows what death metal is, but I kind of felt that maybe it wasn't necessary, but obviously I was wrong. And you've never really spoken aloud. Like, you've asked every now and then, like, okay, so what is death metal? Yeah. So I'm going to present Jaron with a genre and going to see what he thinks that genre is. And then we're going to talk about what it actually is if he doesn't get it right. So we're going to start with the one that we've listened to the most on this podcast, good old reliable death metal. Jaron, what is death metal to you? What defines it?
Death metal. I'm gonna get all of these wrong and
I don't know about that.
Myself. Before I answer this too, you should throw a few not real ones and see if I can catch them.
A few
make up. Like
I didn't prepare for that.
Like blood metal, or I don't know if that's real, but like blood metal, and I'll just make something up, and then and then any listener who's in a metal band can start that genre. Death metal.
Yeah, what's death metal to you?
I think that's I would say that's your generic metal. Not generic necessarily, but like I would say more people know about death metal or have heard death metal songs than any other thing.
I think you're getting it a little confused with thrash metal.
Okay.
You're getting it confused with thrash metal and just like regular heavy metal. So
yeah.
Death metal is kind of like a pumped up version of thrash metal. So something that you would hear from like Slayer or Metallica. There are absolutely different theory elements going on and song structure elements that are different from a thrash metal band. But that's kind of how it got started in the mid to late 80s with death metal, was sort of really cranked up thrash metal bands. To me, the defining hallmarks of what death metal is today is relatively fast tempo. Not as fast as, well, I don't want to say that, not as fast as something else, because that'll give you a tip later, but it's not super fast, but it is relatively speedy, generally speaking. You've got your Cannibal Corpses and Aborted and whatnot that are pretty speedy bands. A lot of sort of relatively low tunings on the guitars, a fair amount of tremolo picking, but not nearly as much as black metal, which is something I'm not going to quiz you on because we haven't really listened to any actual black metal on this program yet. But a fair amount of tremolo picking, and I think the most defining quality of death metal is the lyrical content and the vocal delivery. So lyrical content in death metal is almost universally gory in some capacity. It's gory. The lyrics read like a poem about a 80s slasher movie, which is what a lot of these guys, when they started bands as teenagers, that's what they were into. A lot of these guys were horror movie buffs when they were kids. So that's what they write about. And the the vocal delivery, at least today, in what death metal is in its modern form, is mostly what's called the death growl. That's, where the term death growl came from. It's a very low pitch, sort of guttural type of sound, very hard to understand. And then sometimes you mix the death growl with a very high screech. To me, that's the sort of the defining quality of death metal.
Okay.
Is there is, a relatively conventional song structure, not a ton of super complex, time signatures or anything like that, but it is still fast and it's still extreme. Whereas you listen to something like Metallica and it can be a lot slower and obviously far less aggressive in the sense of, yes, the vocals are still kind of gritty and shouted, but they're not, a super low screamed growl or anything like that. So that's what death metal is to me. To sort of validate your comment a little bit, it is, I think, perhaps the most basic form of extreme metal today. There's a lot of other offshoots that take elements of death metal and incorporate other parts into them to create something new. In the same way that thrash metal and just before that heavy metal has been built off of to create a whole bunch of other genres. Death metal is like that, but a step up in intensity. So it is kind of, it's sort of the blueprint for a lot of extreme music, and then you add stuff onto it.
Yeah.
So you weren't entirely wrong, but just mostly.
I get 1/4 point for
you get 1/4 portion.
1/4 portion.
All right, so one of the other genres that we've listened to on this program is metalcore. This is a type of genre that I've listened to a lot. I suppose Converge is really the only metalcore band that we've listened to. I suppose come May, maybe we'll have to do Metalcore May and introduce you to a lot of other bands. But some names that you might recognize in metalcore is like August Burns Red. I mean, obviously we've listened to Converge, Killswitch Engage, All That Remains. There's a bunch of newer bands that you might not necessarily recognize, but those are sort of the big ones, the big names, especially Killswitch Engage and August Burns Red. As I Lay Dying is another band that you might have heard of, a Christian metalcore band. So what is metalcore to you?
Which Converge album did we listen to again?
We listened to When Forever Comes Crashing, which is one of their earlier ones. And that's a subject that once we get your guess, we'll talk about a bit more.
Oh, I'm trying to remember all the specifics.
Yeah, it's been a while. If you don't come up with something, then that's fine.
Is that where I asked about the blast beats?
I believe that is where you asked about the blast beats, and that is a feature in some metalcore.
Okay.
Converge, especially earlier metalcore, does tend to use blast beats. Death metal uses them a lot too. A lot of extreme genres use blast beats.
Okay.
Although what exactly a blast beat is in that genre is a little bit different. Traditionally, what I consider to be a blast beat is kind of the way that Converge plays them, where it is the fast double kick drum and then some, beating on the snare and beating on one cymbal and sticking to that, whereas some people think a blast beat is just hitting the double kick drum really, really quickly, which isn't necessarily true. Blast beats, I think, originated in jazz. I think blast beats originated in jazz, which is kind of where the cymbal comes in. But so metalcore, to me, is take any kind of extreme metal short of death metal, something that doesn't necessarily have the lyrical content of death metal, but maybe the same vocal stylings, and you combine that with elements of hardcore punk, which is where you get breakdowns. Breakdowns are the most important songwriting hallmark of what a metalcore song is and the way that a metalcore song is structured. Not all breakdowns are the same. Depending upon the era of the bands you're listening to, they might sound the same. There was a sort of a period between 2005 and 2012 where there were a lot of up-and-coming bands that sort of sounded very similar to one another. Early on, like early Converge, a lot of metalcore it wasn't codified. What metalcore was isn't the way that we know it today with modern bands. At the time, it was called metallic hardcore, where a lot of it was kids that grew up listening to hardcore that also liked metal, and decided to sort of combine the two. So you still had breakdowns from hardcore, but they were not the focus of the song the way that it would become with metalcore bands. As the genre sort of progressed, the breakdown kind of became more of the focus, almost in the sense that the drop is the focus of a dubstep song or something like that. The drop is what you're waiting for, and it sort of became that the breakdown is what you're waiting for in a metalcore song, which is not necessarily what we heard with Converge. The Dillinger Escape Plan does that sometimes as well. They're more of a mathcore band, which is another term that we'll talk about. But yeah, metalcore is basically any kind of metal combined with any kind of hardcore.
Okay.
You can do that in an insane amount of ways, or any kind of metal short of death metal, basically, combined with hardcore. And there's a ridiculous amount of combinations and ways that it's been done. And the earlier you go, the less stringent it becomes and the less easily identifiable what metalcore becomes. Like, you could consider, if we go off of combining hardcore and metal being the judge of what a metalcore song is, you could consider some Motorhead a metalcore band, which is something that, any Motorhead fan would probably consider sacrilege and probably beat you up for. We miss you, Lemmy. You were a treasure, and we did not appreciate you as much as we should have. So yeah, what metalcore is today is much more easily definable. There's a lot, and I mean a lot, of metalcore bands out there today. And it's kind of hard sometimes to sift through what I would refer to as scene metalcore. The whole scene kid idea of, early 2000s to now, of people that started out listening to bands like Sleeping with Sirens and that sort of thing, where it's technically post-hardcore, but there's just so much of a pop element to them.
Yeah.
And really sort of poppy vocals mixed in with screamed vocals, which is something that I used to like and that I've mostly grown out of. I've found it harder and harder and harder to get into what I consider to be scene metalcore bands. I don't have the room in my heart for them anymore. Yeah. I just don't care. And there's a lot of them that just, it's like, yeah, that sounds okay, but it sounds the same as something I've heard before. Mm-hmm. And that thing I heard before, I don't even care about anymore. So why should I take the time to really listen to this?
Yeah.
But metalcore is just, it's a contentious topic in the music community in general, because there is such a stereotype of the scene kid that a lot of, true cult metal type people absolutely despise it. Mm-hmm. And, I obviously do not feel that way, because I still like a fair amount of metal, or metalcore. I mean, Silent Planet is probably my second favorite band, and they're a Christian metalcore band. And Christian metalcore is a whole nother topic too. That became a huge thing in the Christian metal, Christian music scene. That was absolutely unavoidable, and it still kind of is, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because a fair amount of them were very, very good. Mm-hmm. And you didn't necessarily need to be a religious person in order to like them. So the next thing, I mentioned mathcore. What do you think mathcore is?
Is that the one with the crazy time signatures?
Yeah. So Dillinger...
Full point for me, yes!
So the Dillinger Escape Plan is perhaps, at least to me, the most archetypal mathcore band that there is. Basically take metalcore, most of it being sort of the late 90s blueprint metalcore, like the Converge album we listened to, but then really spice things up with a lot of very strange time signatures, clashing tempos, and that sort of thing. That's really the definition of mathcore as a genre. It's not really its own genre so much as it is a subgenre of metalcore, because it shares a fair amount of things in common. You'll hear clean vocals used in mathcore, just as you'll hear that in metalcore, but then you contrast it with some screamed vocals. So one that we've listened to 2 albums of, Deathcore. We're getting the cores out of the way.
Getting all the cores.
Getting out of the cores. Getting out of the cores. We were inside the core. Now we have to leave it.
Tunneling out.
We were inside that movie, The Core, which was about a group of people who try to go to the core of the earth for some reason. I think that was a movie. It
You
might have been
mean
a sci-fi made for
Journey to
TV
the
special.
Center of the Earth with
No.
Brendan Fraser and the Hunger Games
Josh
kid?
Hutcherson?
Yeah.
No. I think there's a movie called The Core. Either that or it's like some sort of sci-fi made for TV special. But...
Okay.
So, Deathcore. What is Deathcore to you? This is really simple, by the way.
I think I'm going to overthink it. Is it just like deep growly vocals?
Basically, it's take metalcore and sub what would be thrash metal or progressive metal or something else and sub in death metal. Okay. And keep most of the same lyrical themes and general tone and ambiance, but then use breakdowns. So use the strong structure. Use the general idea of a metalcore song structure, but give it the tone and feel of a death metal song. And you've got deathcore. That's basically it. Deathcore is also very contentious because it has a lot of crossover in its fan base with metalcore. A lot of people kind of seem to age out of metalcore and into deathcore a little bit. That's basically what I did before I started getting a lot more into regular death metal and grindcore and that sort of thing. And there is the stereotype of the deathcore fan / deathcore vocalist of, you know, it's a 20-something with neck tattoos and huge gauges and a million bajillion piercings, which is not something that you really see a lot of in regular death metal. You do see it there, but for the most part, a lot of death metal vocalists, they might have tattoos, usually not a lot of piercings, but that's more where you see like long black hair or beards and that sort of thing. You don't see a lot of that in deathcore. A lot of deathcore is sort of the extreme end of hipster. Yeah. Extreme end of hipster fashion with the piercings and gauges and whatnot. And I don't want to make it sound like any of this is bad. I've got friends who fit that stereotype perfectly, and I have no problems with that. And I think the hate for it is unjustified by a lot of people that just want something to bitch about. Yeah. So I don't want to make it sound like I think any of that is bad. I think metalcore is fine. I think that deathcore is fine. I think both fan bases can be annoying, but for the most part, they aren't. And in my experience, for all the metalcore and deathcore concerts that I've been to, it's been awesome, and there hasn't been an issue.
You saying long black hair, this has nothing to do necessarily with deathcore, but I remember growing up now, I'm not going to say that guy's name, mostly because I don't remember it for sure. But anyway, there's a guy in my hometown who he used to walk around and like nails painted black, like long black hair, and he would wear like he was like looked like a metalhead, but he was like 40 years old.
Well, and there's some confusion too, because I don't want to make it sound like death metal singers are like emo kids.
Yeah.
That's a little bit different. Where like the emo kid look is closer to like the whole scene kid thing with like the dyed multiple colors and raccoon tail shit and that sort of thing. The death metal singer is, basically he looks like me. Like imagine me in my jeans and cattle decap shirt, but with just long hair and a beard. And that's what a lot of death metal singers look like. Some of them might shave their heads and just go with a beard. Some of them don't have the beard. It's but generally speaking, you don't see a ton of tattoos or piercings or gauges like you do with deathcore. That's very much a deathcore thing, and metalcore to some extent as well, that you see that same sort of fashion.
Yeah, and it's crazy, and this just goes for all metal. Like, I guess as somebody who is looking from the outside in, I never imagined what these singers would look like, and from the videos you've shown me, it's like people who they'd get up there, sing their heart out on stage, put the mic down, and like go to Cashwise, the grocery store, and you'd walk past them and think they were just a guy,
There are a fair amount of them who just look like normal dudes.
Yeah.
Although the person that popped into my mind just now is Greg Puciato, who, like, generally speaking, he looks like a normal dude in the sense that he doesn't have a shitload of tattoos and piercings. But that man, he's not particularly tall, but as we discussed before, he is just a monster made of just like solid muscle. He's not a particularly big guy, but good Lord, he's cut, and it's
he was the guy that hung from one arm, right? While singing,
he gets crazy. we've deviated a little bit into like culture stuff, but that is part of a genre, especially in metal. I think is that the culture surrounding the fandom of that genre is as much a part of it as any musical hallmarks are. And that goes for, I think, any music genre. You know, you look at people who like EDM, and there are certain things that most people who like EDM are into and will dress a certain way. And obviously, I don't want to make sweeping generalizations about entire fan bases, but that's just what people notice, and there's a reason that people notice that. You know, the stereotype wouldn't exist if it wasn't at least partially true.
Yeah. And that, a good, I think, something that I'm familiar with is like rap, how there's like, different bits of that. And like now there's all the new rappers, the mumble rappers, as they call them. Like if you look at Kendrick Lamar, who is like this brilliant lyricist and just makes this awesome things, like he looks, like he's a rapper. Like he dresses like cool. Like I think he looks cool.
Cool street fashion.
Yeah. But then you look at like some of the mumble rappers and they have like, instead of hair, they just have beads come down and they have tattoos like all over their face. The dreads
made of beads and that sort of thing.
And they've got a big grill and they not only mumble on the track, but when they are in interviews, they can't hardly talk.
Lil Yachty.
Yeah.
Like that's who popped in my head anyway. When you talked about the hair, it was like Lil Yachty.
Yeah, but that's like with rap extremes. Like if you ask an old man, he looks at, like that's who pops into his mind. But then there's like Kendrick Lamar. I'm sure everybody knows what he looks like. Yeah. But if he walked by you and you didn't know him.
Or like Chance the Rapper.
Yeah. Straight past you and you wouldn't say anything. And that's the same thing with like.
Other than being able to recognize him. Hey, is that fucking Lil Chano right there?
Yeah. But the same thing with like metal, as I think like a lot of these guys, you just think they were guys who had some tattoos or longer hair.
Or, that guy's got gauges. But there's a lot of people who have that. And like there's, to deviate even further, there's sort of a subcultural appropriation that's kind of gone on. Is like scene fashion is slowly sort of leaked out, and it's become more and more okay for people in the general culture to have, tattoos and piercings and that sort of thing. And like I'll see like you look at the guys in Florida Georgia Line, and 10 years ago I wouldn't have said, oh yeah, those guys look like they front a popular country band. I'd look at the tattoos and the long hair and everything and be like, those guys look like metalheads.
Yeah.
Like those guys look like Keith Buckley from Every Time I Die. And they're fronting a country band? What the hell?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just me griping a little bit. So the next one is progressive metal. What to you is progressive metal?
I would say a huge thing about progressive metal is that there's a storyline through most of it.
Okay.
And it's not necessarily a straight shot of just music.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of different elements of like crafting something more than just a song.
I can absolutely see why you would think that, but progressive metal doesn't necessarily have to be a concept album. It doesn't have to have a story. A lot of it does. That's just sort of the nature of the beast. Whether it's something like Fallujah, or that Fallujah doesn't tend to have a lot of stories in their song. They're sort of a progressive death metal act. Whereas you've got something far lighter with Dream Theater. Again, not all Dream Theater albums are concept albums either. But the biggest hallmark of progressive metal is you take standard metal, basically, and you spice things up. Similar to mathcore, you have a lot of different time signatures and really inventive riffs. The idea with progressive metal is to sort of push the boundaries of what metal can be. That's where the progressive term comes from, is you're adding in new things to push the ideas of where you can go with metal. And that's why you will hear a lot of concept albums, because metal that you'd hear on the radio is meant to be on the radio. It's got to appeal to a wider audience. It's still a somewhat narrow audience, but like metal you'll hear on the radio, like Five Finger Death Punch or something, that's very much a product. Whereas progressive metal is meant to be art, essentially. It is pushing boundaries, and that is the biggest thing. Other than, like, you can say, time signatures and all that sort of stuff, and I don't want to talk about that too much because I'm not a music theory person.
Yeah.
If Donovan were here, and maybe I should have been like, hey, Donnie, I'm going to talk out of my ass about music theory. Can you be here and make sure I don't make a fool out of myself? But really, to me, what progressive metal is any kind of metal that pushes the boundaries of what it can be. That's why you can have progressive death metal and progressive metalcore and progressive deathcore. They share a lot in common, but again, they're just pushing things and trying to do something new. And that's why I'm so attracted to them most of the time, because I really get bored with stuff that I feel like I've heard before, whereas any progressive band that I tend to come across, it feels new and it feels fresh and it feels like they're really trying to do something different. And I appreciate that a lot. Similar to progressive metal, I don't know if this is something we've actually talked about. This is a term you might have heard me say before, but what do you think djent is? So it's spelled D-J-E-N-T. Djent. What do you think that is?
The massive conglomeration of a whole bunch of different things.
I mean, sort of.
Including letters.
Sure. So djent, technically speaking, is less of a genre and more of an onomatopoeia. But the term has come to describe a lot of bands that use the sound that the onomatopoeia describes. It is a sound, or it describes the sound that is made when you palm mute the open chord on a guitar. It's like djent, 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 djent. Basically what it sounds like. And that became popular with a Swedish progressive metal band called Meshuggah. And they started using that sound more and more and more. And a lot of bands came out later that were very influenced by them and started using that same sound. The most important one to what would become djent as a genre and the invention of the term, it's been attributed to multiple people, but as far as I know, the word djent is primarily attributed to, well, I've heard it, okay, I don't want to, now I'm speaking out of my ass again. I've heard it attributed both to Fredrik Thorendal, who's the guitarist for Meshuggah, and I've heard it attributed to Misha Mansour, who is the guitarist for a band called Periphery. Misha Mansour's done a whole bunch of other stuff. He was featured not too long ago on the Halo 2 Anniversary soundtrack, which is something I forgot about until I was playing it the other day, and I was like, holy crap, I forgot Misha Mansour was on this. It has a lot in common with progressive metal, and a lot of people just consider djent to be a subgenre of progressive metal. And to that end, you can find djent sounds in places like metalcore and deathcore and that sort of thing, to the point where it's like, can we really call this progressive metal anymore, or is this just djent? Because the focus becomes that sound, and it really is just that sound of the djent, 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 djent on the open chord. And you can do a lot of really interesting things with it. There's a band from Minneapolis called After the Burial that's super popular, and they are a djent band, and I've seen them live, and they're absolutely fantastic. But it is kind of an interesting topic, because it's like you have this entire genre that's just named after a sound that happens to be a part of it, which is sort of weird to me. So the last one we're going to talk about today is one that I've had you listen to before, but not for the show, but it's something that I've shared with you, is grindcore. What do you think grindcore is?
Which albums were these?
I showed you Pig Destroyer. I think we've listened to Nails before. I thought about a couple weeks ago having you listen to Gridlink. I think I might have showed you a little bit of Gridlink. And there are bands that we've listened to that have elements. Cattle Decapitation has some grindcore elements. Anal Nathrak has some grindcore elements. So, with those bands in mind, and if you remember what Pig Destroyer sounded like, what do you think grindcore is all about?
Is grindcore fast?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
That is kind of their deal. Grindcore is famous for kind of being fast and, dare I say, sloppy in a sense. It's got a less of a focus on technical precision than something that you might hear in death metal, and more of a focus on just raw speed and just a raw sound in general. It shares some lyrical content with death metal. Grindcore tends to be a bit more political. But yeah, speed is the important part with grindcore, and there's some debate as to where the name grindcore came from, whether it was supposed to be, some people have said that it's a description of the bass guitar and how the bass guitar in the background is just kind of completely drowned out and it's sort of this really grindy, sort of overdriven mess, so to speak. And then there is also people who say that grindcore came from, I don't remember if it was Carcass or Napalm Death, but people talking about those bands and saying that it was just a grind up of metal and hardcore and a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's where the term grindcore came from, is you just throw a whole bunch of genres into a blender and grind them up. So there's some debate as to who coined the term and where the term came from in the first place. Today, speed is a defining factor. It wasn't always that way. For a while, what we would call, or what was called grindcore at the time, today sounds much more like what death metal is today. So grindcore has really sort of evolved, and there's a similar genre called power violence that was a further development of hardcore punk and making hardcore punk even more intense in the same way that grindcore takes a lot of elements from thrash metal and death metal and makes them even more intense. And, some bands kind of switch between. Nails is really good. Nails switches between power violence and grindcore, sort of depending upon the song. There's some argument that the genres are so similar. There is a point where the genres do become so similar that it's hard to tell the difference. At two different ends, I think it's very easy to tell the difference. Power violence tends to be a bit more chuggy, still very fast, but a bit more chuggy, whereas grindcore is just faster in general, with a lot of faster picking going on. Grindcore also has some of the worst band names in existence. There is one that I will say on this podcast. If you're sensitive, please cover your ears. There was a grindcore band called Anal Cunt.
Oh, gosh. I think you've brought these guys up before.
Yep. A lot of people like to just call them ANC, or I've heard even AXC. They were around for a while. Their lead guitarist / vocalist died I think in 2009, he died of a heroin overdose. So there is sort of this reputation of grindcore as being this very dirty, sort of druggy type of metal.
Yeah.
And I'd say, that's not really true, and that's more true of stuff like crust punk and that sort of thing. But punk is something that I don't know nearly as much about as I do metal, other than like some melodic hardcore, like Counterparts, which is the sweatshirt I'm wearing because I love Counterparts. But yeah, that's pretty much our genre lesson for today. We went pretty long, but I think that's all right. It was nice to get some information out there for the listeners and for you.
And if anybody's new, and maybe they'll start on the newest episode, and they'll have a great foundation laid for them.
Yeah, and you can go back, and then going forward, you'll maybe have a better idea of what it is we're talking about. If you're not the type of person that listens along with the albums that we like to talk about. I forgot to talk about this at the beginning of the podcast. An album that I listened to this week, it's not a metal album. It's pop punk, or just sort of rock / emo album. It's the new Wonder Years album.
Okay.
It's technically not out yet as of this recording, but they put up a stream through Independent Magazine on SoundCloud that I've listened to a couple of times. And holy crap, it's really good.
Okay, I didn't know if that was going to go good or bad.
No, it's really good. The Wonder Years is my favorite band, and it's really, really good. And like the last song, every time I've listened to it, it's brought me to tears. And it's, there's hardly been a song like that in my life recently, and so it's really welcome. And I'm really, really glad that they put out something new and that it is this good. But that's just me fanboying out for a minute or so.
So when does that officially come out?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Okay.
Yep. So I've just been waiting for it to drop so I can listen to it on my phone and whatnot.
Your brand new phone.
My brand spanking new phone. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Well,
we didn't do a Kale's Bottom Shelf Liquor, mostly because I didn't buy anything new. I actually had this last week, and I wouldn't necessarily consider it bottom shelf. We've got a bottle of Windsor here. It's Canadian blended whiskey. I think I've had Windsor before. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm a Canadian whiskey guy, and it's not bad. It's pretty good stuff. That's all I have to say about Windsor. Okay, social media time.
People can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at the Bronze Medalist Podcast.
Yep, and depending upon what you're listening to right now, of course, you can find us on Libsyn, YouTube, and iTunes. And if you're listening to us on iTunes, you could be like our 2 committed fans that inspired this episode and give us a nice rating on iTunes, to the point where my brother-in-law has been like stealing phones from people and opening up their iTunes accounts and then leaving a rating on iTunes. So thank you, Josh. Your guerrilla fan base tactics are very much appreciated.
And I hope they are working.
Yeah.
I hope 100 new people see this.
100 new people.
Up.
Yep.
If you're watching on YouTube and you want to suggest something, if you're lost on a certain aspect
or anyway,
of music,
you can leave comments anywhere.
That's true, yeah. Leave a comment down below and we can do something like this and kind of clear the water on anything that's being...
that's being talked about. Or if you think there's a specific album that we should talk to or listen to, don't send me Five Finger Death Punch stuff, because I refuse to listen to that. I don't like Five Finger Death Punch. Used to when I was like 13. Grew out of them real quick. Anyway, I think I was older than that, but I was way older than that. Okay, that's the podcast. It's time to end. It's time to end. We're way over time.
It's time to end this.
It's time for the Jedi to end. My name is Kale. Thank you so very much for listening. With me
is Jaren.
And should we have nothing left to say? Should we go back to that?
We have nothing left to say.
Yeah, we have nothing left to say.